Thank you very much, Conor, and it's great to be here today to speak to you all on this topic, and to see so many familiar faces in the room as well that we engage with on a regular basis in LAWPRO. So as Conor said, I'm Bernie White. I'm one of 5 regional coordinators within LAWPRO. And I know, as I say, we probably know a lot of people in the room, but just a slight reminder on what LAWPRO was set up to do originally, or the Local Authority Waters Programme. It is a national shared service working on behalf of all 31 local authorities across the country, and we are funded by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and we're jointly managed by both Tipperary and Kilkenny County Councils. And what we do is we support implementation of the Water Framework Directive through the River Basin Management Planning cycles for Ireland. And I suppose, as we know from earlier presentations, that's around protection and restoration of water quality. I suppose LAWPRO as an organisation, we're quite new. I suppose we kicked off in 2016 and we're known as the Local Authority Waters and Communities Office with a small team of 20. And then that subsequently was added to with the Catchment Assessment team added in 2018. And we're almost at the end of another expansion phase now, where we've recruited an additional up nearly 27 staff between last year and this year. And what it has meant is we've kind of reflected conversations we've been having with implementing bodies, with the public, and through other engagements over the last several years, and looked at areas where there was maybe deficits of supports required to communities, or where local authorities required extra supports, maybe on nature-based solutions, etc. And we've used that to inform where gaps needed to be completed. But we're also looking ahead to the 4th cycle. So unfortunately, as we're all well aware, we're not going to achieve our Water Framework Directive environmental objectives by 2027. So it's really important that we look ahead and plan and put proper systems in place now in the 3rd cycle, build on what has been done in the 2nd cycle, and look ahead to the future. So just briefly to mention the Water Action Plan, it's quite new in terms of its being launched in September 2024, and you'll be aware that across all the sectors there are commitments there in relation to dealing with the pressures that are impacting on water quality across the country. So it does set out how different sectors are going to protect and restore Ireland's natural waters, but also, I suppose, it places specific emphasis on accelerating implementation. So throughout the 2nd cycle, there's quite a focus on building networks and collaborations and working to develop the characterisation of our catchments so that we had really good information to inform where measures would be required. But really now in the 3rd cycle, we significantly need to escalate measures implementation on the ground. And a lot of people will be aware of the mantra for the 2nd cycle, which was looking at the right measures in the right place to both protect and restore water bodies. So in the Water Action Plan, and I'm not expecting anybody to read this, we have a lot of actions that we're leading on in LAWPRO, 23 specific actions, and we're also supporting others then in the delivery of actions they may be leading on. Some of those are quite significant. And I'll talk specifically about a couple of those in this particular presentation. But I thought, again, when I mentioned systems earlier, I want to specifically mention the governance structures that were put in place for the 2nd cycle of the Water Framework Directive. Now, in terms of the governance structures, it operates at different levels. We obviously had on Forum Ishka, which was established looking specifically now at water quality and Water Framework Directive, as well as water services, which is fantastic. But at the regional scale, which is where we specifically implement on a regular basis, we have 2 committees. We have the Regional Water and Environment Management Committees, which directors of service from each environment section in the local authorities sit together with ourselves and LAWPRO and the EPA, and we look at issues that are coming up within the regions in terms of delivery on the ground, resourcing, funding, any other issues that are blocking implementation at the regional level. And then we also have regional operational committees, and this is where we invite operational staff within the local authorities and other implementing bodies that can include IFI, OPW, National Parks and Wildlife Service, Ishka Éireann, the Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, etc. It's quite a broad group, but within that group there is a significant amount of knowledge sharing happening. There are issues being raised that need to be addressed that can be discussed and proposals for changes being made. So these are really important committees operating at the regional level. But those committees then are also engaging with implementing bodies individually and also with stakeholders. So as I said, those regional operational committees are a really important structure for the Water Framework Directive delivery. They meet on a quarterly basis. So in some of the regions we have between 20 and 60 people meeting on a quarterly basis. For the third cycle, just to note how that governance structure is going to change slightly. If you notice to the bottom left-hand side of the chart there's something mentioned called a catchment fora, and I will come back to that in a little bit later in my presentation. But just to say, these are really important groups, and they are a vehicle through which communication on climate issues can also be addressed. While they specifically focus on Water Framework Directive, co-benefits in terms of biodiversity, climate, and other systems are really all interconnected and discussed within these groups. So again, in the Water Action Plan, there are a number of new actions proposed. One of those is the development of sectoral action work plans by all that will contain actions by specific sectors in relation to pressures. So those I'll speak about in a minute, but those sectoral action plans will be high-level plans which will include national plans and policies and programs that are contributing towards improvement of water quality, but it can also include, for example, the educational piece that was spoken about earlier by Ken, such as citizen science, etc. So how are we going to develop better communication and engagement and participation by our communities in this whole space? There is also a proposal to develop catchment management work plans, and these specifically then will get down to the catchment scale and the water body scale. So for us in LAWPRO, we're constantly talking about the water body scale, because when we engage with communities, whether that's our community water officers or on the catchment science side, when we're going out to do local catchment assessments, we're down at working at the water body scale. So we're having conversations about specific rivers, in some cases specific small streams, for example, that may have issues associated with them. So it's really important that in the catchment management plans we get down to that specific granularity in terms of measures implementation. So only actions carried out in a specific catchment will be included within that particular plan. And the idea behind this is that we layer all of the information together in the one place. I'm just going to mention briefly that there will be local authority action plans as well, and this will be tied specifically into their own enforcement activities, which also contribute, as we know, into the delivery of Water Framework Directive objectives. So that can include, for example, agricultural inspections, investigation of complaints, etc. So I know there's been slides earlier on the status and where we sit in terms of trends in relation to water quality, and we know that we're on, unfortunately, a stable or downward trend in some cases for some of our surface waters. But I just want to focus on the pressures for a minute. And a lot of people will be familiar with this particular graph. We know that agriculture is the most significant pressure that we have on our water bodies, with up to 1,000 water bodies impacted nationally. But we also have a significant number of our water bodies impacted by hydromorphology, and that's where the physical form and the flow of the river has been altered because of a specific intervention or activity that has happened. In some cases, that's associated with historical arterial drainage schemes. In other cases, it's to do with barriers, for example, that have been put in place. Some of them, again, historically, some of them perhaps newer, and maybe, again, due to not having perhaps the correct regulation in place, that those particular impacts are continuing to occur. Forestry is there, ranked as number 3, and you'll see that urban wastewater is there as well. So on the sectoral action plans, what has been proposed in the Water Action Plan is that 7 specific sectoral action plans will be prepared. 1 on agriculture, 1 on hydromorphology, 1 on forestry, urban wastewater, peat, and then just change slightly, 1 on drinking water source protection, and then 1 on invasive species. And I suppose those plans need to take into account, for example, the ones related to agriculture down to peat, specifically how many water bodies they're impacting and what the plan is, what are the measures to fix those particular water bodies. And as I said earlier, they also need to take into account how that sector won't create pressure on other water bodies that are currently achieving their environmental objectives. So each sector needs to prepare a sectoral action plan by Q1 of 2025, and we're currently engaging with those sectors in relation to what the plans will look like, what they'll contain as a first generation of those plans. We're also using pilot catchments across the country to just test the gathering of information that will inform those sectoral action plans, but in particular, how we'll use information to develop the catchment management work plans and also inform the development and setting up of proposed catchment community fora. So just to mention, these are the 5 catchments. Some people may be aware of them. The Boyne is representing the Midlands and East. We have the Mal Bay in the southwest. We have the Slaney in the southeast. Galway Bay southeast for the western region, and the Newry, Fane, Glyde and Dee catchment then in the border region. And that will look at cross-border issues as well that arise in the water quality space. But the catchment management work plans specifically then, the structure of those will include the characterisation information that's available within those catchments at the water body scale. And there's a breadth of information available for that I might talk about in a minute. It will also set out the environmental objectives for each individual water body, but a key to these then will be the actions that will be taken at a water body scale by each of the implementing bodies to address their significant pressures. So the work that will be done in the sectoral action work plan compilation is a significant feeder into these catchment management work plans. But importantly, what we want to set out as well is how the implementation reporting is going to take place on a regular basis and how evaluation and monitoring of the implementation can also be facilitated. And a new action that was introduced between the draft River Basin Management Plan and the final River Basin Management Plan was that there would be an additional climate check built in to the work of the development of the catchment management work plans. And that would be undertaken in line with EU guidance, I think, that was updated in June around this particular area. So the analysis, or a simplified climate check as they describe it, in line with that guidance, will inform the setting of the environmental objectives for the 4th cycle of the River Basin Management Plan. So there's a real opportunity here to look at very detailed information per catchment and look at the climate impacts that may be occurring as we've heard this morning in several presentations, things like increasing droughts, increasing floods, and how that might impact on things such as discharge licensing consent, or looking at, for example, increasing impacts, as was mentioned, in relation to pathogens and so on. So in terms of our decision making, we've never had better data. Anyone that's familiar with catchments.ie will know that you can get a lot of information very quickly there. In terms of the Galway Bay Southeast catchment, for example, we know what water body types we have between our rivers, lakes, transitional and coastal water bodies, and our groundwaters. We have very ready information there on the status of our waters, and we can see which ones are meeting their objectives in terms of achieving high or good, and those that have a lot of measures required. And we can also look specifically then at the most sensitive of our water bodies, those high status catchments that were mentioned earlier that are in decline, and that we need to kind of reverse the decline of those. I suppose the characterisation that the EPA have delivered in the 2nd cycle has really been a fantastic foundation for the work that we're doing in LAWPRO, where we can take information that's been delivered and inputted to by local authorities and others, and use that at the local scale then to further refine the characterisation information and inform decision making around measures implementation. So in the Galway Bay Southeast, we can see here we've 26 water bodies at risk. So already we've kind of got a profile of where significant action is required. But one thing I find really interesting, and I want everybody to watch really, is just how trends are changing between different cycles of monitoring under the Water Framework Directive. So we can see, for example, in this catchment, we went from a situation where we had 13% of water bodies at high status, and that dropped, and now is coming back up again. So we know the profile of our pressures, we know the profile of the issues those pressures are leading to, such as nutrient pollution, organic pollution, etc. But now we have great mapping to support targeting of measures, such as the agricultural measures flag mapping produced by the EPA. And if you look over to Galway, if you can zone in there, we've got navy flags where we know we've got phosphorus problems, for example. But we also know from the mapping of the urban wastewater pressures, for example, specifically where they're causing impacts on water quality. And through the development of the catchment management plans, we're getting very detailed information back from each sector. Is an example from Uisce Éireann, where they're adding more information to demonstrate how they are addressing these issues. Data and implementation report flow is going to be really critical to the success of these particular plans. And systems will need to be adapted and built to be able to capture that information, but we have a really strong base in terms of the system that's there already. Some activities will require new data to be collected, or data to be collected in newer ways to inform these plans. So this cycle and these couple of years are going to be really important in terms of putting that together. In terms of oversight, then, the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage are developing a programme delivery office. And this will be really important in terms of coordination and oversight and the high-level policy direction. But the regional committees will have a role as well in terms of tracking implementation at that catchment scale. There will also be a mid-year review of, or an interim review of the Water Action Plan at the end of 2025, and we'll be able to see how progress in relation to the development of these plans is progressing. I mentioned the catchment community fora earlier, and I suppose central to the Water Framework Directive is the public participation piece as per Article 14 of the directive. And in the third cycle, there is a significant ambition there to augment the participation in terms of the establishment of the catchment community fora. And within those particular fora, amongst other things, we can look at how the communities can be more engaged in water resource management and in decision making within their own catchments and at that local scale. So we have spent the summer meeting in those 5 pilot catchments with the community groups and individuals that are working and living within those catchments, and we've gathered information from them around what format they would like the fora to take, who they'd like to be involved, what kind of activities would those fora carry out, what do they need to succeed, etc. And hopefully by early next year we will have a report on that to be able to share with all stakeholders. And again, I would say this would offer a fantastic forum to be able to engage local communities on issues around climate, water quality, biodiversity, etc. So just finally, in terms of next steps then, we're continuing to meet the implementing bodies on the generation of the sectoral action work plans. There's a lot of work still to do on data management and data flows and looking at the communications, but ultimately it will bring greater transparency to the whole Water Framework Directive space and also allow us to look at that effectiveness of measures delivery. So the priority between now and end of the year is to get those templates ready for the sectoral plans, the catchment plans, but also to work with the regional committees to look at changing how they are going to work in terms of tracking of measures implementation. Just to say that these will be first generation plans, so we're looking for a lot of feedback. I would say please consider them as an opportunity to build in climate requirements and to improve better decision making in terms of some of the pressures, and also to create those feedback loops back to the communities through the forum as well. Thank you.